So here's a fun fact that, you know, you could say, I'm made for dancing. Well, anatomically wise, you were made most of all to be an efficient walker. Okay, you're everything about your system. If you think about our ancestors, so there's a little example of them there. They were hunter-gatherers, and they had to cover great swaths of land, great swaths. And we had to get really good at looking for food, and maybe even, you know, like that idea of set up camp here and then go look for food. Oh, we've used up all the food in this area. Walk again, set up camp here, and then we're constantly nomadic, right? Which means I'm always walking. Now, if we were very inefficient with how we moved, that would mean we're burning a lot of calories just to do anything. We'd be using a lot of muscle, which uses a lot of calories. That would mean we'd be spending all of our life looking for food. So if I consume 2,000 calories, but then the next day I spent 1,500 of them just looking for the next 2,000, I wouldn't have any extra caloric intake to fuel things like brain development, thinking, coming up with tools so that maybe I don't have to walk so far or whatever. Okay. So one of the big differences between animals and ourselves is they're not very efficient. They're really good for what they need to do. So like a cheetah can run fastest thing on the planet, right? But it's got about 2 minutes into it before it needs to stop. And we could, though, as you know, not outrun a cheetah. We could outwalk a cheetah. We could outwalk an elephant. We could outwalk a dog or a cat. We can, when we're moving appropriately, outwalk anything else on the planet. We are that efficient. And there's a little percentage there that when we're walking properly, using the elastic nature of the body's design and structures, we get 93% of our energy back again. So only 7% of my intake, my calories and usage of all that gets used to actually for the muscle work of doing what we're doing here. Oh, sorry, I just got an admit person here. Okay. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Okay, happy to have you here. And you'll get the recording, so don't worry about what you've missed, okay?
It's not your study.
Okay, so we've got our efficiency and resiliency. And you note too, at the beginning when I said, to me, spine is all about being resilient. But our whole structure is about that. Okay, so that's number one. We're designed for efficiency and resiliency. And we're going to look at the spine with regards to that. The other thing we're designed to deal with, of course, is the gravity and ground. We already mentioned a bit about that. We've got ground forces that come up and our weight that comes down. Now, we are not designed to try to pull away from gravity. We'll never win. Gravity always wins. Okay? And when I think of gravity, this makes a bit of a sound, sorry, but if I think of these little tube things, if I think of our spine, if we go back to when we were hypothesizing what it might be like if we were straight, then gravity, which pulls us straight down, that's our plumb line, would have, be prepared for the noise, would have a great deal of compression. Let's see if I can do this. Just straight down. Even that doesn't want to go straight down. All that compression down. Ugh. Even that, actually notice, this is actually a good, in fact, I can't do it well, it's a good thing. When I go straight down, it still wants to bend, doesn't it? Wants to avert the forces. Okay. And then we have coming up from below and adapting to all the changing terrain. Okay. So we've got that we're dealing with. So what does that mean for our spine? Well, I already mentioned this idea that I need my shock absorption and the transmission of force, protecting our brain. So we've got all the force coming up and all the force coming down. We need to absorb it. And part of the way we absorb something, okay? So if I was to just wrap my hand down, that's going to hurt. If I wrap my hand down on the sponge, hurts a whole lot less. Now, why is that? Any thoughts? You can't see everybody, so put it in the chat. Oh, you know what? When I screen share, I can't see chat. Well, that sucks. Okay. Well, in that case, to keep the screen share on, I guess I'll just let you know. If I'm going here, the reason this gives less pain and impact is because it slowed me down. Maybe by a millisecond, but it slowed me down and distributed the force. So all the force didn't just go to right here. It got slowed down and spread out. That's what shock absorption or force transducing force could be also looked at. Okay. Now the cool thing, the part that blew my mind, it's like I knew this, but I didn't really know it in the spine, is this next bit here. Okay. So if we've got our curves in our spine here, right? When I have my force coming down or up, right now I'll keep doing down, it just goes through the curves. Well, we know that, right? It's kind of like it's acting like a spring, okay? But it's not just acting like a spring in this way. What's actually happening is it's acting like a spring to the tissues out here. So I'm going to use my little TheraBand here. So if pretend this is like part of the curve of the spine. And when it gets moved back more, it stretches the tissues that are on the outside. These would be the ligaments and the smallest muscles. When it stretches like that, the body has been brilliantly designed to turn the stretch energy into kinetic energy. So the reason I got the picture of the balloon there is you think of a balloon as this thing that's all stretched. Then when you let the air out and it can convert instead of staying contained, it flows all over the place because it had movement energy, right? The balloon doesn't suddenly have muscles or wings or anything. It's the kinetic energy being released, right? So here we go again. So if this, let's say, was a lumbar curve, and I'm letting my lumbar curve change and increase, I now get stretch energy, stretching on the tissues, fascia included, right? And then what does it want to do? It wants to actually send it back. It wants to be released and go back, right? There's another picture of a spring here. So instead of thinking of the springs this way, which we typically think of a spring, you can think of the springs as being this way, the curve pushing into that spring, okay? Getting all that potential energy. So I hope what you're getting right now is, oh, wait a minute, my curves move and give me energy. Yes, yes, they do. That's why we're such efficient walkers. Another little picture on it here. You know this one of the slingshot. When I'm pulling it back, the thing that's in the slingshot, I should get a slingshot as a prop, shouldn't I? All this stretch energy is ready to go. That's kind of like a plie to jump, as we know, right? But that plie to jump happens in your spine as well, if I let it compress. So I'm going back and then it wants to go. And then I'm just putting a little note in there because I don't actually have plans to do a stretch class at this moment, but putting it out there to make sure everybody's getting the latest info that a static stretch held for too long, like we're talking the 30-second, minute-long stretches, cut your power, your explosive power for like by a considerable amount for up to an hour or so after. So gone should be the days of doing a heck of a big, say, hamstring stretch after the end of the bar and then expecting like grand allegro, grand jetés to have any power. You're really setting students up for damage there. So do just kind of a full body. I'm just a dynamic stretching, meaning I never stop moving. That's all great. And then if you really want to reset muscle length stretches, you do that at the end of class after the expectations of power. And since many of you probably have students that take this class and this class and this class, I know that if I'm their ballet class after the jazz class, we can do a big stretch. But if I'm their ballet class before their jazz class, no, they're going to have to do the big stretch at the end of jazz. And that's just communication within the studio and teachers. But I digress a bit, but just since we're talking about stretch, make sure that that's out there to help you keep your students safe. Okay, now another idea then is this idea that when we are correcting our students, it's so much easier to get your hands on them when they're still. Of course it is, but it's also often confusing things because being static, if I'm trying to ask a student to, let's say, find the power for that rise, but they stood still getting corrected before it, where they're choosing to recruit the power from is not really the design of how the body was, which is stretch energy into kinetic energy, stretch energy into kinetic energy. Okay, so if that girl got their pelvis all beautifully aligned and was asked to rise, that's different than, say, maybe you do a rise without paying attention too much and then go plie rise and find the second rise as the response of the plie. Now you're going to be able to talk about the stretch energy. So I think that's a tricky thing. I love doing hands-on corrections, but what's interesting is the longer I teach, the less I do, because I go, darn it, the only time I can get my hands on them is when they're still. I'm sure you all have the stories of being injured. I got a black eye once from coming in to help, you know, the rib cage come around, arms are up here doing chaînés, and I just, you know, got clocked by the elbow by a tall girl. Yeah. So I learned my lesson about maybe we don't always try to help them when they're moving. It was a rookie mistake. Didn't do that again, but not fun to go around with a black eye, I tell you that. People give you pretty concerning looks. And when you say it's a ballet injury, they just don't believe you. All right, so now back to, this is super important. Let's have a look at, again, more on this the next time, but all these little processes, right? They're attachment points. In this case, we're talking about for muscles, and you've got ones that connect one vertebrae to the next, then ones that connect up a 2 or up a 3 or up a 4. But the big ones that we tend to feel and use for all our voluntary movement, they're not connected in this way at all. They're like the long ones that do like from top to bottom. Okay. It's the short little tiny muscles though that do all the stabilization. And you can think of them the same as when I was saying this idea of a ligament stretching with the change of a curve, or the fascia stretching. All these little muscles too go, oh, hey, we moved, and they've got potential energy. And what do they want to do? They want to move back again. They want to keep going. Okay. This is super important, again, for the idea of dynamic balance. Nothing about being static. Okay, and I just got a few more slides before we're going to do application of class here. You already heard about this with the joints, this idea of the compression, decompression. Same thing goes for all the discs, right? Also went through that. Same thing goes with allowing rotation. I think rotation is a very underutilized awakener and stabilizer and teacher of the spine. But you can't do an arabesque without there being rotation. Even if you want to call it the counter rotation, it's still there. In fact, again, more for the next time, the idea that I don't actually, the natural movement is to not do a lateral flexion. For me to do a pure lateral flexion, I'm actually counter rotating. Actual lateral flexion has some rotation as well, because we're designed to continually move 3-dimensionally. As I said earlier, we're always meant to be moving 3-dimensionally. So for the body to be designed to just do a pure flexion doesn't match. Why would I do that? Why would I just do this? I'd probably be turning my head, spiraling around to see what I'm trying to pick up. That's the actual function. Okay, now, one of the biggest mistakes that I think I made and had a pretty big misunderstanding about was this idea of thinking of my spine as my center line. Okay, so now we're getting into what does this really mean in dance class. If I think of my spine as my center line, I will probably be trying to think of, let's say that version of the obelisk this way, of going, oh, if I was to build a building, I should put, you know, the little bodies, the weight-bearing things perfectly stacked on top of each other. Well, that might be true if you're building a building, but you're not. You're being a dynamic moving human. So the idea of stacking our vertebrae one on top of the other is an image that doesn't match the anatomy. Okay. It's also an image that doesn't support the movements of the curves. Okay, so if we look where that line is, okay, so I've got my version of my curved spine here. Okay, and then I'm going to let my little snake here be my center line. Okay, let's say my center line is hanging like that, kind of like in the picture you're seeing there. All right, and you'll see if I was to think of it like the segments of the snake, but think that they need to stack, well, I'm using that image to create straightness. There's no getting around that. Stacking my vertebrae makes me create straightness. But what we actually want is the curves so that when compression, let's say from above, happens, my curves all increase and then decrease and increase and decrease, increase and decrease. I'm better with my right hand on top here. Okay. And The next picture actually shows something kind of cool here. See the curve here, say at the cervical, making a little triangle out to here, this degree, and then this one's bigger, and then this one's smaller, and all that. The center line is designed to go through these curves so that its compression makes it change. So think of, I'm going to make it just one curve. Okay. If I have my center line here, where this hand is, it's going to compress differently than if I have my center line here. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's putting it at a different angle. So the center line is designed to, in a sense, stack up the whole parts, but what we're really stacking up is the force transmission to make all of the curves move in a balanced way. I want my center line coming down so that they press on these curves, moving them in opposition, right? One's going to go forwards, one goes back, so that they all have their nice, almost like an oscillation of rebounding here to here, so that I continually bring back in that stretch energy. Right, and then I think that's where we're going to finish for the thing, and now we're going to look at all of our cues and stuff. Okay, so that was a lot of information, perhaps new, perhaps not. The idea